Welcome everybody to panel Z2, new approaches to Colson Whitehead, the 52nd, I think, Louisville conference. No, yeah, I think it's the 52nd edition of the Louisville conference. We have three presenters today, and we would just start from our first presenter, Kwangsoon Kim from Kongju National University in South Korea. Kwangsoon is Associate Professor of English at Kongju National University in South Korea. He earned his PhD in English from Purdue University. His research focuses on contemporary African American fiction and film. His work has appeared in a number of academic journals, both in South Korea and in the United States. Today, he presents a paper entitled The True Face of America, Fantastical Escape into Racial Reality in Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad. There you go.
Okay, and can I start now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, the title of my essay is True Face of America, Fantastical Escape into Racial Reality in Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad. Okay, I just prepared the short paper, and I'm gonna read this paper. Okay, this study aims to discuss how Colson Whitehead's speculative historical novel, The Underground Railroad, critiques the racial realities of contemporary America. The surface plot of Whitehead's novel imitates the traditional structure of the slave narrative following Cora, a slave on the Randall plantation in Georgia, as she embarks on a journey along the Underground Railroad, encountering fantastical adventures along the way. In fact, the inclusion of fantasy elements in neo-slave narrative is no longer a new technique. Neo-slave narrative novels such as Ishmael Reed's Flight to Canada, Octavia Butler's Kindred, Toni Morrison's Beloved, and Edward P. Jones's The Known World employ fantasy techniques to depict the history of slavery and explore the struggles of black slaves in their pursuit of freedom. However, Whitehead's The Underground Railroad is a uniquely original work in that it reimagines the Underground Railroad, a term that was metaphorically used to describe the escape routes that helped enslaved people free from the south to the north through the lens of fantasy. In the novel, it becomes a literal subterranean railway network that physically operates deep south beneath the south to aid enslaved individuals in their escape. The story follows the protagonist, Cora, who flees from the Randall plantation in Georgia and embarks on a journey toward freedom aboard a secret underground train. At the beginning of the novel, Cora does not escape of her own volition, but is who sees her as a symbol of good fortune. After Caesar's death during their escape, Cora continues her journey, aided by white station agents of the Underground Railroad, secretly traveling through the South aboard clandestine trains. Her escape route, which begins on a plantation in Georgia, takes her through South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee before reaching Indiana. In these locations, fantastical landscapes unfold, where elements of future urban settings and racial events from the 20th century are anachronistically interwoven. However, in these places that transcend the historical reality of slavery, Cora's hope for freedom is constantly overshadowed by fear and despair. Due to the relentless pursuit of Ridgway, a legendary slave catcher, until the the very end of the novel, Cora remains trapped in the uneasy existence of a fugitive, never fully free from the threat of being captured. In Whitehead's novel, this study focuses on the meta-narrative elements embedded within his fantastical slave narrative. By literalizing the Underground Railroad into an actual railway network, Whitehead's novel aligns with the new slave narratives that emerged in the late 20th century, which revisit the historical space of slavery. The most representative fantastical slave novels, such as Octavia Butler's Kindred and Toni Morrison's Beloved, similarly use fantastical elements to depict the history of slavery. However, their purpose is to transport modern readers who might hastily believe in the closure of slavery's historical legacy back into the brutal realities of pre-Civil War America, forcing them to directly confront the horrors of the institution. In contrast, Whitehead's novel disrupts the reader's emotional immersion in 19th century American slavery, rather than facilitating an immediate and visceral confrontation with history. It creates a narrative distance, challenging conventional approaches to the neo-slave narrative form. Only in the Georgia chapter, readers directly encounter the landscape of the South as it existed during the era of slavery. The other locations Cora reaches via the Underground Railroad diverge from historical reality, presenting futuristic landscapes that reflect 20th century history rather than the antebellum South. Each time the train stops, Cora finds herself in an environment radically different from the historical South. In the South Carolina chapter, high-rise buildings and elevator appear, and Cora witnesses inhumane racial eugenics experiments conducted on black people. The events unfolding in South Carolina allude to historical incidents such as the Tuskegee syphilis study, in which U.S. public health authorities secretly conducted syphilis experiments on black men, resulting in 128 deaths, and the forced sterilization programs carried out in the American South between 1929 and 1974 as part of racial eugenics policies. North Carolina appears in a state where black people are not enslaved, but are subjected to a strictly strict segregation policy. Although they are no longer slaves, laws prohibit them from existing in the same spaces as white people, and even white individuals who attempt to protect black residents are executed. Thus, North Carolina in the novel symbolizes a space dominated by Jim Crow laws, which in American history aggressively enforced white supremacy and racial segregation after the abolition of slavery. In the Tennessee chapter, the landscape alludes to the Ku Klux Klan and its brutal violence, which emerged after emancipation. Meanwhile, in the Indiana chapter, the novel presents conflicts and divisions among future black leaders, disregarding the chronological timeline of history. The tensions in the Indiana chapter mirror the ideological clash between Booker T. Washington, who advocated for racial integration through assimilation into white society, and W.E.B. Du Bois, who emphasized political struggle and societal change to address racial issues. Cora moves non-linearly through these fantastical spaces. Just as an event in one location reaches its climax, she is transported to another space, effectively resetting the narrative. As a result, readers are not primarily drawn to a conventional story of enslaved black people suffering under cruel white masters. Instead, the novel shifts their focus to the symbolism of fantastical spaces Cora traverses and the overarching narrative that connects them. Escaping from a plantation in Georgia, Cora continuously moves beyond the time and space of slavery into fantastical landscapes. Despite this escape, however, she remains a fugitive slave, relentlessly pursued by the legendary slave catcher Ridgway. Cora's relentless journey of escape forms the central narrative of the novel, functioning as the meta-narrative that critically examines and interprets the traditional slave escape story. While traditional slave narratives presume the existence of land of freedom, Whitehead's novel challenges this notion. Although Cora escapes into fantastical landscapes, she remains bound by her enslaved status, shattering the illusion of an ultimate space of freedom envisioned in earlier narratives. Cora is in constant motion, searching for freedom, yet she merely moves from one oppressive space to another, never reaching a true land of liberation. Ultimately, readers who are accustomed to the familiar narrative of a runaway slave achieving freedom confront the harsh truth that the Underground Railroad can never deliver Cora to a place of true liberation. Then, what does Whitehead seek to critique through his historical novel on slavery? Whitehead's fantastical slave narrative is not intended to make readers confront the past, but rather to expose the ongoing legacy of slavery, demonstrating that slave narrative continues to shape the lived experiences of Black people in contemporary America. The significance of Cora's escape narrative is clearly revealed through the words of Lumley, a white station agent of the Underground Railroad. As Cora and Caesar board the train, Lumley tells them, "If you want to see what this nation is all about, I always say you have to ride the rails. Look outside as you speed through, and you will find the true face of America." At the moment, it is unclear whether Lumley's reference to the true face of America signifies the frontier spirit of a nation expanding westward along the transcontinental railroad or the racial reality of American society that Cora would come to experience through her fantastical escape. However, by the later part of the novel, Cora realizes that Lumley's words pointed to the latter. It was a quote, "It was a joke. Then from the start, there was only darkness outside the windows on our journeys, and only ever would be darkness." End quote. Here, the image of darkness outside the window metaphorically represents America's racial reality. Even as she escapes slavery and moves through fantastical versions of a modern American society, marked by skyscrapers, elevators, and the rise of Black leaders, Cora remains trapped in the darkness of the underground train. The novel suggests that the train carrying Cora will never bring her to a place of true freedom. This is not because of the white station agents who operate the Underground Railroad, but because slavery, which served as the foundation for America's economic and political prosperity, has been absorbed into the nation's racial policies and economic system, continuing to shape and oppress Black lives. In this sense, Cora's transformation in the final part of the novel is a highly symbolic moment within Whitehead's meta-slave narrative. Throughout her journey, Cora is depicted as an enslaved person who moves with the assistance of others. She is not an agent of her own freedom, but a passive passenger carried toward liberation by the agents of the Underground Railroad. However, In the final chapter of the novel, Cora is no longer a passive figure, but transforms into an agent of her own destiny. At Valentine Farm in Indiana, she discovers the possibility of living not just as a fugitive, but a member of a community. She works on the farm, thinking independently, and gains a new perspective on the society that free Black people are striving to build. This shift illustrates her growing determination to take control of her own life. Even though the farm is destroyed by a white mob, forcing Cora to flee once again, she is no longer a passenger of the Underground Railroad. The railway system that once carried her has been shut down, and she has to navigate the sealed tunnel and carve out her own path. Significantly, Cora kills Ridgway, the slave catcher, who has relentlessly pursued her, and then, rather than relying on anyone to operate the train, she drives the handcar through the underground tunnel herself. Cora no longer depends on the Underground Railroad. Rather, she moves by her own will. This signifies that she is no longer someone who simply receives freedom, but rather someone who actively claims it. At the novel's end, when Cora heads westward instead of the northward, she fully breaks away from the conventional Underground Railroad narrative. Whitehead derails Cora from the traditional trajectory of escaping from the south to the north, and instead sends her westward. Thus, rather than receiving a pre-existing freedom in the north, Cora must forge her own existence and build her own home in the uncharted west. Ultimately, Whitehead's fantastical slave narrative dismantles and shuts down the Underground Railroad, a system that, at its core, rendered Black individuals mere passengers within American society. In doing so, the novel demands that they become active agents of their own destiny. Okay, this is all I prepared.
Perfect. Perfect timing. I was just putting in the chat that we were 5 minutes away and you managed to finish ahead of time. So thank you very, very much, Kwangsoon. I also realized I did not introduce myself, and I'm really sorry about that. I'm the least important person on the panel, but I am a professor here at the University of Louisville, a professor of postcolonial and translation studies. So I'm really interested in the topic that is being discussed at this panel.
Okay,
So thank you very much, Kwangsoon. We move on to our second presenter, Jaya Srivastava. She is really deserving all of our awe and respect because it's almost 2 in the morning where she is, and she is here with us. She's assistant professor in the Department of Humanities, Social Sciences and Management at the National Institute of Technology, Srinagar, Jammu and Kashmir in India. She earned her PhD in English literature from the Indian Institute of Technology, Indore, where her dissertation focused on cognitive narratological approaches to the novels of Colson Whitehead. She also has a master in philosophy in English linguistics from the English and Foreign Languages University of Hyderabad. Her research interests span from contemporary African American literature to cognitive poetics and narratology, and she brings a multidisciplinary perspective to her work. She has published extensively, both in national and international venues, and has presented her work at multiple conferences, both in the US and internationally. Her work continues to explore the intersection of narrative, cognition, and cultural studies. Today, Jaya presents a paper entitled Narrating the City, Spatial Practices and Temporal Layers in Whitehead's The Colossus of New York. Jaya, you can share your
Uh,
screen and I
Thank you
will
so much.
silence myself. Thank you and welcome.
Um, Thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction. I hope the slides are visible. Right.
Yes.
Greetings to everyone across different time zones. I am delighted to have this opportunity to present my work with all of you. The title of my paper is Narrating the City, Spatial Practices and Temporal Layers in Whitehead's The Colossus of New York. Colson Whitehead's The Colossus of New York, which was published in 2003, offers a meditation on the ever evolving nature of urban life, particularly how the city is shaped by memory, perception, and transformation. Through a fragmented impressionistic narrative, Whitehead explores how New Yorkers experience space and time, drawing attention to the ways in which memory resists urban flux. In doing so, he engages with theories of spatial practice, memory, and identity formation, aligning his narrative with theorists such as Henri Lefebvre, Michel de Certeau, and Andreas Husserl. This paper examines Whitehead's negotiation of urban temporality, arguing that his work encapsulates the dialectical tension between permanence and ephemerality in the modern city, positioning memory as a means of both resisting and assimilating change. Whitehead's opening meditation, City Limits, establishes the key theme of memory's role in urban identity. He writes, no matter how long you have been here, you are a New Yorker the first time you say that used to be Muncie's or that used to be the TikTok lounge. The implication is that one's status as a New Yorker is not merely a function of duration, but of an awareness of urban transformation. To be a New Yorker is to engage in a process of counter imprinting, whereby memory superimposes past impressions onto the present landscape, producing a subjective city that exists parallel to and often in conflict with the actual city. As Whitehead poignantly notes, you are a New Yorker when what was there before is more real and solid than what is here now. This act of cognitive mapping reflects what Mark Turner and Gilles Fauconnier describe as conceptual integration, the ability of the mind to reconcile multiple cognitive spaces to construct meaning. In the literary mind, Turner expounds on this, noting that cognition is inherently conceptual and its essence is the use of concepts and their integration into larger frameworks. This larger framework is, in Whitehead's case, a mental map that weaves together past and present, reflecting on individuals' deeper emotional and cognitive attachment to the city. This subjective mapping of space aligns with Lefebvre's notion of the production of space. He argues that space is not merely a physical entity but a social construct shaped by practices, memories, and lived experiences. Whitehead mirrors this idea when he writes, you start building your private New York the first time you lay eyes on it. This articulation suggests that urban dwellers continually reconstruct the city within their own subjective frameworks, resisting the dominant narratives imposed by urban planners and developers. Certeau further elucidates this resistance in the practice of everyday life, where he differentiates between the strategies of institutions that shape urban environments and the tactics of individuals who navigate these spaces through memory and perception. Whitehead's narrative enacts this dynamic, positioning memory as a tactical force that challenges the strategic logic of urban transformation. However, Whitehead also underscores the limitations of memory as a stabilizing force. The subjective city that each individual constructs is inherently incommensurable with others' experiences. There are 8 million naked cities in this naked city. They dispute and disagree. The New York City you live in is not my New York City. How could it be? This fragmentation reflects Andreas Husserl's Argument in Present Pasts, where he contends the contemporary memory practices. He contends that contemporary memory practices are marked by a struggle between nostalgia and the relentless forward momentum of modernity. Whitehead's invocation of multiple conflicting New Yorks exemplifies this paradox, illustrating how urban identity is both deeply personal and irreducibly plural. This multiplicity is further explored through Whitehead's depiction of the Brooklyn Bridge, a site laden with historical, architectural, and personal significance. As one character crosses the bridge, she experiences the city's layered temporality. She steps on the bridge to exit, level at first, lulling her. A bridge takes a while to get to the heart of its argument. The bridge becomes a liminal space, a threshold between past and future, familiarity and estrangement. Whitehead describes how the bridge absorbs the vibrations of the city's movement. Every vehicle on the motorway sends its vibration through the bridge and into her soul. This description aligns with Lefebvre's concept of rhythm analysis, which suggests that cities operate through multiple overlapping temporalities, mechanical, social, and psychological. The bridge in Whitehead's account embodies these rhythms, revealing how urban infrastructure internalizes and reflects the city's ceaseless dynamism. Whitehead's use of bridges, tunnels, and elevated train tracks as recurring motifs symbolizes the constant transitions between differing versions of the city, where the movement from one neighborhood to another constitutes a shift not only in space but in time. The commuter experiences the city both physically and temporally, but the passage itself is never neutral. It is a negotiation between past and present, between what was and what is. This dual movement encapsulates the ambivalence embedded in urban life. While the city presents itself as an ever changing, forward moving entity, it is simultaneously burdened by the weight of its accumulated histories, both personal and collective. Furthermore, the temporal layers embedded within urban spaces reflect the tension between aspiration and disillusionment. Whitehead's depiction of the cyclical nature of ambition in the city evokes a sense of existential weight. He writes, "A couple of years ago, he stopped in this very spot, shook his fist at indifferent skyline, and declared, 'You can't break me.' This passage captures the ever present hope that New York offers for reinvention, yet it is tempered by a profound sense of repetition and inevitable change. Individuals continuously redefine their relationship with the city as their circumstances evolve. Yet, this transformation is often accompanied by a sense of loss. What did you hope to achieve by this adventure? Nothing has changed, nothing ever changes. This sentiment reflects Hewson's notion of urban melancholia, where the past is both an anchor and a burden, preventing full engagement with the present. The city thus becomes a palimpsest where temporal layers interact, often in ways that challenge the notion of linear time. These overlapping temporalities complicate the experience of urban life, as spaces are never purely present but are always haunted by memories, aspirations, and traces of the past. Whitehead's narrative in this regard serves as a dialectic between presence and absence, construction and erasure, memory and forgetting. The urban environment, seen through the lens of Whitehead's writing, becomes a repository of experiences that are never fully erased but persist as fragments that continue to shape contemporary urban life. In light of this, Whitehead's work is deeply resonant with Lefebvre's assertion that space is not neutral but rather imbued with the traces of power, memory, and social practice. The temporal layering within the urban space of New York is not simply a metaphor for the passage of time, it becomes a form of resistance to the erasure of histories that are often excluded from the dominant urban narrative. Whitehead's New York is a site of constant negotiation where personal and collective memories coexist, often in tension with the city's relentless modernization. One of the most striking features of Whitehead's meditation on the city is his exploration of the psychogeography of New York. He invites the reader into a world where time and space collapse into one another, revealing a city that is perpetually in motion but always defined by the imprints of its past. Whitehead's fractured narrative structure mirrors the ways in which memory and perception break down the linear experience of time, creating a space in which the past and present are inseparable. As Mark Turner explains, the mind understands experience by constructing conceptual blends, interweaving disparate elements to form complex images and meanings. Whitehead's narrative mirrors this blending of temporal elements, constructing a cityscape that is at once unified and fragmented, a place where different times, experiences, and identities converge in dynamic tension. Ultimately, Whitehead's The Colossus of New York provides a profound reflection on the complexities of urban temporality. The city is not merely a backdrop for human activity, but a dynamic, ever shifting entity that is continuously reinterpreted and reimagined through the practices of its inhabitants. In his exploration of memory, identity, and space, Whitehead gives voice to the multiple fragmented realities that coexist within the urban environment. His work exemplifies how the intersection of space and time in the modern metropolis reveals the tension between permanence and ephemerality, shaping both the city's physical landscape and the experiences of those who inhabit it. Through its intricate engagement with space, memory, and narrative form, Whitehead's work offers a compelling framework for rethinking the ways in which we inhabit and remember the modern metropolis. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jaya. We had the best speakers ever. I was worried about having to interrupt our panelists, but we don't have that problem. Thank you very much. We will have plenty of space, and I can already see some common threads cutting across the various presentations. So we can move on to our third and final speaker, Justin Reed from the University of Cincinnati. Justin received his BA from Cornell University, an MFA from Florida State University, and an MPhil from the University of Cambridge. He is currently a PhD candidate in English and creative writing at the University of Cincinnati, and his creative and critical work has been published in several reviews, including the IRA Review, Epoch, Consequence, Post Road, Flash, and elsewhere. His fiction has received several awards, a special mention in the 2019 Pushcart Prize, and his stories have received several prizes and awards. He has been assistant fiction editor for Consequence magazine, a senior reader for Harvard Review, and a lecturer at Tufts University. He is presenting a paper entitled The Gears of Intimacy and Isolation, Balancing Internal and External Causation in Fiction. Thank you, Justin, and please take away.
Thank you all. And I just want to note before I start that I have a newborn, and I currently have someone who has little experience watching my son 2 rooms over, in case you hear crying. But thank you to both of my fellow panelists for your wonderful presentations. And as a fiction writer, I'm going to shift the focus to a craft discussion now with my essay, which, as noted, is titled The Gears of Intimacy and Isolation. I write fiction that moves. In workshops, I ask students, how do we keep a story in motion? And I encourage them to consider journey as a heuristic for the engine of plot. My students usually focus on physical journeys, which is natural. Plot progression often depends on outside forces. An antagonist foils the hero. A natural disaster strikes. Society works to separate lovers. But while readers are willing to suspend disbelief for fantastical events or magical conceits, it's difficult to connect to a narrative if we don't feel what the characters feel. So I implore my students to pay equal attention to characters' emotional journeys. Focusing on 2 case studies, Ilana Massad's All My Mother's Lovers and Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad, this essay explores techniques that heighten tension and drive characters' internal development, even when external forces dominate a narrative. I will argue that balancing internal and external causation is key to crafting characters and plots that resonate emotionally and offer deeper insights into the complexities of human experience. In Massad's All My Mother's Lovers, external pressure emerges immediately. Maggie's mother, Iris, dies unexpectedly, leaving their unresolved tensions over Maggie's sexuality permanently unsettled. Returning home, Maggie learns Iris survived a previous abusive marriage and left behind letters to unknown men, instructing that they be sent after her death. Instead, Maggie delivers them in person. She uncovers Iris's decades-long affairs, including one with a trans man, and ultimately learns her father and Iris had a polyamorous marriage. Confused, angry, and sometimes awed, Maggie's journey becomes one of reckoning with her mother's secret life. Maggie's fraught relationship with Iris balances the novel's internal and external pressures, driving both her physical and emotional journeys. The internal causation of this novel is propelled by what I've termed the gears of intimacy and isolation. The more Maggie learns about Iris, the more she realizes she doesn't know, heightening tension and deepening her need to understand. As Peter Turchi writes in A Muse and a Maze, quote, "We tell ourselves we know people well, but there will always be parts of their interior lives that remain inaccessible," end quote. Maggie's desire to bridge this gap keeps the plot in motion. This begins even before Maggie understands the import of her mother's letters, when she learns Iris has bequeathed her son Ariel her engagement and wedding rings. Maggie reads this as proof that Iris didn't value her marriage prospects, a moment in which she simultaneously comes to know her mother's true feelings and grows more isolated from her. Quote, "Could she have smelled something on Maggie? An inability to commit? A failure to love? She tries to push this away. Iris knew nothing about her," end quote. Anger and grief thrust Maggie onto both her physical and emotional journeys. She leaves hoping to understand more about her mother's life, wanting to resolve the sense of isolation she feels. The novel's structure also heightens the tension between intimacy and isolation, alternating between Maggie's perspective and moments from Iris's past. A chapter set 5 years prior to the present action shifts to Iris's point of view on the bad day, the anniversary of her first marriage. On this particular anniversary of the bad day, Iris was supposed to meet Maggie's friend, unaware that the friend is actually Maggie's lover, but she cancels instead. Maggie assumes rejection, but Massad's point of view shift complicates the record, revealing Iris's buried trauma. Quote, "Her children didn't know she'd been married before. No matter how many times she was told it wasn't her fault, she was ashamed of how many years she'd spent subsumed in this marriage. She didn't want her children having that kind of example in their lives," end quote. Inept as she may be at communicating, Iris nevertheless tries to protect her children. Later, when she realizes she's missed the chance to meet Maggie's girlfriend, she reflects on her daughter's sexuality. Quote, "Iris feared for her daughter being different, standing out, making herself a target to the hateful people of the world. She didn't understand how anyone could choose that identity. She knew she wouldn't have chosen to be Jewish, for instance, if she hadn't been raised by her parents, no matter how ingrained it was in her now," end quote. Her fears are more complex than Maggie perceives. Iris conflates her Jewish otherness with Maggie's queer otherness, fearing a hateful world as she once feared her abusive ex-husband. Massad's switchback structure affords the reader context Maggie lacks, and her sense of isolation is a result of this lacuna, even as Maggie's journey takes her into a deeper understanding of her mother. The novel's task then becomes reconciling these contradictions. Maggie articulates this tension explicitly when she meets Liam, her mother's trans lover. Quote, "She wants to ask him what Iris was like, as if they've never met before. But would she recognize the woman Liam might describe, or would it only make her feel farther away, more unknowable?" End quote. Learning that her mother was in a queer relationship is both a revelation and a rupture. She marvels over the sudden entrance of her mother into the space Maggie didn't know she could occupy, a space that had until now felt wholly her own. Quote, "All these years, Maggie submerged herself in queer culture. These have been her people. Among them, she learned to be entirely who she is, not only as a lesbian, but also as a person. All these years, this has also been a space that her mother couldn't take from her," end quote. Iris's presence in this world unsettles Maggie's sense of self rather than affirming it. The intimacy is too much to bear, the gap between them correspondingly too wide to understand. Why couldn't she give me one of the rings, she laments, as if this symbolic gesture could close the gap. But Liam slowly brings Maggie to an understanding of how deeply Iris was transformed by the relationship. She says in her breakup letter that she couldn't risk her home life any more than she had already, he says. So she knew, Maggie thinks, and something in her loosens a bit, just enough to be able to keep bearing this. Iris knew she was risking something here. She cared enough to say that. Liam continues, deepening the sense of intimacy between daughter and mother. She didn't talk about you often, but she'd occasionally tell me something she learned from you. I think she was listening at least sometimes. In a novel whose internal journey is propelled by the gears of intimacy and isolation, the climax leads to either total alienation or breakthrough. All My Mother's Lovers lands on the latter, when Maggie's father, Peter, reveals his polyamorous relationship with Iris, rooted in his asexuality. The revelation shatters Maggie's assumptions. Quote, this woman he's describing, Maggie can half recognize her, but not fully. When Maggie asks, why did she start hating me? Peter is firm. She did not hate you, he says. She didn't understand you. But I think she made it be more about your sexuality than it ever needed to be. I think she didn't understand you because you're similar, but she was terrified of what the world could do to you, and she was terrified that she couldn't protect you, so she tried to change you. Maggie, finally convinced that her mother loved her, begins to understand why the gap between them persisted all their lives. She soon learns that there is a codicil to the will, leaving Iris's wedding ring to her, completing her emotional arc. I guess you gave me a bit of the future after all, Maggie thinks. With this knowledge, Maggie finally tells girlfriend Lucia she loves her and, quote, feels calm, even secure in this bed with her beloved, in this house she grew up in, where something of her mother's essence will likely linger forever, end quote. Though Iris remains in some ways unknowable, the gears of intimacy and isolation have worked to bring Maggie through both her physical and emotional journeys, allowing her a deeper understanding of the complex, conflicted, and even loving person her mother was. Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad has an even clearer source of external pressure, Cora's escape from slavery and search for freedom. And yet, despite these exigencies, Whitehead focuses as much on Cora's emotional arc. The internal causation of the novel, which is centered on an evolving, ever more nuanced understanding of freedom and its limitations, functions in lockstep with its external causation to keep Cora moving. While Whitehead could rely on the institutional pressures of slavery alone to drive the plot, he complicates his narrative by highlighting Cora's struggle to decide whether to stay or leave various spots on the Underground Railroad. Often, it is Cora's inner journey that leads her to continue her physical journey, a subtle assertion of agency that reinforces her emotional and intellectual development. When she originally considers fleeing north, Cora thinks, to escape the boundary of the plantation was to escape the fundamental principles of your existence. Impossible. Freedom is a physical remove from the plantation, a nearly inconceivable act, one that is antithetical to Cora's identity. So when she does escape to South Carolina with Caesar, adopting the name Bessie in the process, freedom becomes an embodied experience. Quote, Bessie liked the breeze afforded by the windows. She removed the dress she had bought her second week in South Carolina. The soft cotton on her skin thrilled her, end quote. While South Carolina is a slave state, it seems to offer a much more enlightened attitude towards, quote, colored advancement than the rest of the South, as the conductor Sam notes. For months, Cora and Caesar grow comfortable in their new lives, with the arrival of each train offering no immediate cause for them to leave. Eventually, at a social gathering, they decide to stay permanently. But despite Cora's newfound autonomy, the chapter undermines her sense of security and complicates her understanding of freedom. While she is free to come and go from their boarding house and is paid for her work, she is still property of the United States government. Her bodily freedom is further undermined during a painful doctor's visit, where the gleaming steel instruments looked like tools Terence Randall might have ordered for the blacksmith for sinister purposes, and the examination of her genitals was painful and made her ashamed. Later, at the social where Cora and Caesar decide to stay, she witnesses a harrowing incident. A woman running through the green crying out, "My babies, they're taking away my babies." Cora assumes the woman is haunted by losing a child, a fear that, quote, still lived in all of them, end quote. Importantly, Cora acknowledges for the first time that while her body may be nominally free, she is still subject to mental and emotional slavery. Despite the comfort in their decision to stay, it was a long night for Cora as her thoughts returned to the woman's screams. Whitehead sets in motion the internal causation that leads Cora to flee again. This is heightened by Cora's new work assignment. She will leave her job tending a child named Maisie and work at a museum reenacting life as a slave. She regrets this. Despite Maisie being spoiled, she made Cora, quote, wonder what her own children might be like one day, end quote. Though the museum work is easy, it brings Cora face to face with the tactile sensations of her past. The coarse, quote, authentic Negro cloth she wears to reenact her enslavement makes her burn with shame. This physical reminder not only recalls the reality of slavery, but also underscores her continued enslavement. Her shame is deepened by rude visitors, particularly the children who banged on the glass and pointed at the types in a disrespectful fashion. The exhibit opens the same day as the new hospital, where Cora visits Dr. Stevens, who encourages her sterilization as a chance for her to take control over her own destiny, though for some women, the operation is compulsory. Cora thinks, then there was the matter of mandatory, which sounded as if the women were property that the doctors could do with as they pleased. Cora's understanding of freedom shifts. Physical relocation is no longer enough. Walking home after an upset, Cora finds herself in front of her former employer's house. Her subconscious has led her here. Quote, perhaps underneath, she was thinking about children, end quote. Her distress is not only about bodily autonomy, but also the fear that her future and the futures of her descendants will be stolen. Quote, with the surgeries that Dr. Stevens described, Cora thought, the whites had begun stealing futures in earnest, because that's what you do when you take away someone's babies, steal their future, end quote. She is so distraught that when the new servant opens the door, Cora gives her real name, a slip that leads to the return of slave catcher Ridgway. Cora's distress continues upon learning of the state's involvement in strategic sterilization, intended to keep formerly enslaved people free from bondage without white people fearing retribution. She realizes her fears extend beyond Dr. Stevens to systemic persecution. Was it possible that not only the doctors, but everyone who ministered to the colored population was involved in this incredible scheme, she wonders? She sees that women are treated not like, quote, pure merchandise, as formerly, but livestock, bred, neutered, penned in dormitories that were like coops or hutches, end quote. In some ways, Cora feels more dehumanized than on the Randall plantation, going to work at the museum as if returned to the furrows of Georgia. When Maisie visits, Cora sees the child as a symbol of institutional racism and lost futures, and fixes her with a menacing gaze. I'll break you too, Maisie, she thinks, and the child runs away. While Whitehead effectively creates a sense of internal causation for Ridgway's return and sets Cora's journey in motion again, he introduces the slave catcher only after Cora has come to understand the limitations of her freedom. While fixing the evil eye on Maisie is a small act of defiance, it marks an important shift in her agency. Quote, from then on, Cora selected one patron per hour to evil eye. She picked the weak links out from the crowd. The weak link. She liked the ring of it, to see the imperfection in the chain that keeps you in bondage. Taken individually, the link was not much, but in concert with its fellows, a mighty iron that subjugated millions. The people she chose did not individually persecute Cora. As a community, they were shackles. If she kept at it, chipping away at weak links, it might add up to something, end quote. Cora expands her understanding of freedom, seeing it not just as a physical condition, but a mental agency, freedom of thought and decision. Whitehead underscores this shift with Cora's recollection of hearing the Declaration of Independence back on the Randall plantation. Quote, she didn't understand the words, most of them at any rate, but created equal was not lost on her. The white men who wrote it didn't understand it either, if all men did not truly mean all men. Not if they snatched away what belonged to other people, whether it was something you could hold in your hand like dirt or something you could not, like freedom. Freedom, Cora realizes, is an abstraction, a mental construct, the meaning of which she will have to define and claim for herself. Ultimately, Cora arrives at the Valentine farm in Indiana, where in a true free state, she finds a community for the first time. While the Underground Railroad is structured as a physical journey shaped by external forces, it is Cora's internal journey that truly drives the novel. Her understanding of freedom deepens beyond mere escape, culminating in the realization that freedom was a community laboring for something lovely and rare. Though even this refuge will be taken from her, the novel ends with Cora pressing forward, now guided not just by the pursuit of physical liberation, but by a fully realized vision of what freedom means. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are perfectly on time. We will have actually quite a lot of time for Q&A. I really like the whole trajectory that the three papers designed and the very different approaches that each one of you brought to the fiction of Colson Whitehead. So I'll open the floor to questions, but also just reflections. And I invite the panelists to engage with each other's approaches because I think there is a lot that can be done, and we can take a few minutes just to go over. I have to at least our notes on what was said. I also want to applaud each speaker for really being very mindful of time and respectful of each other's time. So thank you so much for that. And since it's a small group, I would invite everybody to just, raise your hand and open the mic. We can be pretty informal in this small in this small group. But before we move on, I have to say something to Justin. Congratulations on having a new baby. That's something I could not list because it was not in your bio, but it's pretty amazing.
Thank you. It's baby
Thank you.
two during my PhD. So I am
Sorry?
this is baby two during the course of my PhD. So I am sleepless.
PhD has been very productive.
Yes, that's right.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. But I also know when you were saying, if I hear somebody crying, we would not have heard it or her, but it's just that it goes in the head and immediately to the heart and to the brain. It just makes a big, has a big impact. It moves, like you were saying at the beginning. So anybody would like to break the ice with a question or a reflection? Then I think I'll go first. I would like to, one thread I have noticed in each one of the, especially in the first two papers, is the emphasis on temporality and spatiality connected through memory. And in a way, also the third presentation has to do with this interiorization of our relationship to our being in place and time in a sense. So my question has, well, it's not really a well-formulated question, but I'm interested in having Kwangsoon and Jaya talk about a little bit more about how specialized memory functions in the works that you are analyzing. So in your paper, Kwangsoon, you talk about how playing with temporal play levels or layers allows a certain engagement with the contemporary reader, right? The modern reader. So when we are in South Carolina, then you have all of these skyscrapers. You have this almost oxymoronic, I would say, temporal layers juxtaposed, and because you work on the meta-fictional or meta-narrative techniques used by Colson Whitehead, my question has to do with how do you see spatiality and temporality really interacting at the metafictional level? And how do you think that the author is using his creative techniques, and I'm bringing him in, Justin, also for in this sense, to move the readers, to affect it, or to maybe even more than affect, to bring in, involve readers in what is being told. Does it make sense what I'm asking, Kwangsoon? Because I started one way and then it was a bit of a
Yeah,
convoluted process. But you see where I'm going, right? The
yeah.
connection between temporal, spatial,
Mm,
and uh, personal memory, personal and
mm,
collective memory.
mhm. Yeah. Well, yeah, today's presentation actually, yeah, my presentation was Underground Railroad. There was uh the novel is about like the memory of slavery, like how contemporary America should deal with the memory of slavery in the United States. And absolutely, this the novel is about the spatial and temporal memory of slavery, how, like the history of memory as a space that exists in the past, like a long time ago, 150 years ago, and the space is there. Um, but like speculative narrative, like I mean, a lot of like the neo-slave narrative writers, they try to bring the space of slavery to the contemporary society, contemporary readers. Um, and like the and the time is there, and but the space is seems to be like a mixed with the contemporary society because like the space like I mean the space of slavery does not exist simply in the past. Like a contemporary society, we still see the similar scenes of like slavery. Like actually, my essay more focused on like the similarities between like antebellum Southern society and contemporary American society in terms of like a spatiality. There are similarities between two different spaces. So like a so instead of simply setting the novel into the past, like the Colson Whitehead tries to mix like the spaces of like antebellum society and like after the society, American society after emancipation, like by mixing like in a 20th century America, 19th century America, and 20th century America, even 21st century America, like um, Justin like described the scene of like South Carolina, the museum part, but that is actually the museum in the Washington D.C. Like there is like a display like actually we can experience antebellum Southern society in the museum like sometimes like and in the past, I heard that there were like humans, like slaves, like were displayed to show how the re like the to give like the immediate experience of slavery. So like the South Carolina chapter absolutely brings the modern style of a museum to the like the the southern like the space the space of the past. So like the spaces are really mixed in this novel, and the time it's not really linear, a non-linear way. So yeah, absolutely. The Colson Whitehead mixes the time and spaces in order to intervene with the contemporary racial reality of a modern America. That's what I'm thinking.
And I think, and I would like everybody to join in. The reason I ask this question is that I'm reading, let's see if in this mess that I have here in my office, I can find this this book. It's entitled Salvage, and it's by Dion Brand. And one of the big chapters at the beginning is Reading in the Wreck is the subtitle. And one of the major points, arguments that Dion Brand makes, and the context is how we read modernity through modern fiction, and is to, as a writer, especially as a writer, as a descendant of the Afro-Caribbean diaspora, the responsibility to intervene in the narrative. So exactly what I think each one of your papers has highlighted is this: it's a narrative that marks its own difference at different levels and in different ways. So by disorienting in space or in time, or the museum, making us see the museum through external eyes, the museum as a fictional, artificial space in which you want to recreate something that is not current, but at the same time really colors contemporaneity. So it's extremely complex. And I think that for me, this is very, very interesting as from the perspective of the person who reads, but also from the perspective of the writer who feels the responsibility to enter such an overcharged, overloaded, and complicated historical experience. How do you hand on, right, something like this? So I find that each one of your papers has really kind of illuminated the such narrative complexity and the complexity also of the reception. Jaya, do you have thoughts?
Yes. As far as Colson Whitehead's The Colossus of New York is concerned, I find that it is more than a meditation on urban life. I think that it's a metafictional exploration of how space is experienced and how rapidly transforming space is narrated and how it is constructed. So, Whitehead does not present New York as a fixed entity, but as a dynamic and self aware construct. A self aware construct, and for this, he directly uses a metaphor. Basically, he is personifying the city. He is using the metaphor. He repeatedly used this phrase that the city knows you, which exemplifies this idea, suggesting that New York is not just a place, but a sentient presence, aware of those who traverse it. Right. So for me, this was an important metaphor, and city thus becomes. He presents the city as a metafictional text, whereas there is self-reflexivity, where a narrative acknowledges its own construction. So the city is both the setting as well as an active participant in its own way. And the concept of conceptual integration, the conceptual blending, correctly describes this fact where two concepts blend and a new narrative space is created. So for modernity, for the explanation of modernity, something or the city that transforms itself rapidly, for a person who inhabits this rapidly changing city, it becomes important for the person to somewhere have a track of the existence and transformation of the city, and the person is able to do it by blending the two spaces, the space of an inanimate object, which is a city, and the space of an animate entity, which is that of a person. And when you blend these two spaces, you get a new third space wherein the city is able to talk to you, the city perceives you, the city is able to construct you. And by this through this creation of the third space, the person inhabiting, the characters of this non-fictional piece, these characters are able to comprehend the city, and in a very self-reflexive way the city is also able to comprehend the inhabitants. So this is how a dynamic picture is being portrayed through this narrative, non through this non-fictional narrative.
Simona, you mentioned the difficulty of handling this narrative complexity that Whitehead sets forth in something like the Underground Railroad. And again, coming at this from a craft perspective, what's at the forefront of my mind is how do we make a reader believe, right? There was not literally an Underground Railroad, and yet we have this in this novel. And so what craft tools are at our disposal for creating a sense of verisimilitude? One of those is the documentation that Kwangsoon talks about, right? Literally plunking either actual documents from advertisements about runaway slaves or fabricated documents. Doing that, you reveal you peel back the veil and reveal the scaffolding of the narrative itself, the constructiveness of the narrative. And there's something oddly counterintuitive in acknowledging that this is a written thing that adds to its verisimilitude, that gives it a sense of authenticity, makes us believe. But I'm also firmly of the mindset that to feel is to believe. And Whitehead's writing, especially in the South Carolina chapter, one of the things that I do when I teach this novel is I ask my students to tell me what happens moment by moment in the plot. And I mean in extreme detail, especially in the South Carolina chapter. And I said, no, that's not what happened. Wait, we got to go back. This is what happened. Then this happens. And then this happens. And when you break it down like that, you show the chain of causation. Why does Whitehead include this moment of the evil eye with Maisie? How does this affect Ridgway's entrance into the novel? Because his writing is soft and so understated that it's easy to get swept up into it and forget the difficulty of crafting that psychological causality that leads from one moment to the next in a way that it is so much more satisfying than just having external events propel the plot.
So we all have to become writers to be able to, but it's true. So much gets taken for granted, right? Which is, and I had the book right next to me, the one I was, it's not that I'm advertising it, it's just that I have been reading it in the past few days to prepare for the conference. And the idea of reading from the rect, or to reading from, and I'm thinking the novel I know the best is really the Underground Railroad. So that's why I have this idea of the meta-narrative level, which goes very well with what you're saying, Justin, and with your paper, your argument in your paper, Kwangsoon, in the sense that it makes you see the craftiness, the constructedness of what we're reading, and also how our own position as readers is built, right? Is created, is, if you want, shaped by the writer, and we inhabit. But the other thing that I thought was interesting is how it makes you aware of the context around you. That's one thing that I was thinking about with every presentation, how such narratives that are so in place or out of place at the same time. heighten one's sense of locatedness as recipients, right? And I find that particularly very compelling, and especially given the topics that are being discussed. And I would see this also in an urban novel like the one you were discussing, Jaya, because um, you go from, the rural antebellum, if plantation landscape of the Underground Railroad to a city that is almost so well known not to be known in a way, by so overexposed, overrepresented in literature, in film, in popular culture, in world politics. I mean, so it's kind of almost an information overload about a city, but then uh, the place itself is much more evasive, I would say, or elusive. So these are very, very interesting reflections. Do you have questions for each other?
Well, for me, like today, actually, I haven't read the Colossus of New York, but uh, but what I mean by like a Colson White, I may colorize in the writer like a Colson Whitehead. He's an African American writer. So like the Colossus of New York seems to be a little bit like out of like his thematic repertoire. Well, I mean the book is about New York, like it's about like a urban identity, like basically mobility of urban identity, how something like that. Listening to this presentation today. How can I like connect the book to the like Colson Whitehead's like a literary trajectory? Like he I mean he tries to like uh deal with many social issues like a Nicholas Boys, like another issue, and Underground Railroad, like a celebrity issue, and Zone One, maybe like but I'm not sure about like the New York. What about New York? Why? Why did he write about New York? What is, like this question might not be related to in our presentation, but that question came to my mind. Why? Why New York? Anybody can answer the question?
Actually, Colson Whitehead, by writing this non-fictional piece, in which he has written basically 13 small essays on 13 key aspects or geographical features of New York City. For example, he has written a short essay on the Brooklyn Bridge,
Mhm.
then Coney Island, then one on Rush Hour, right? So there are total, it's a collection of 13 small essays. But as far as I have studied and done my research, he is paying a sort of a tribute, you can say, to E.B. White's work. E.B. White is another writer and who has also written a very, an essay on New York. So, to differentiate his narrative approach from E.B. White's narrative approach, Colson Whitehead, employs this very, again, a very skillful narrative technique to capture the dynamism of New York, as, in contrast with the static picture that we get of New York from E.B. White's work.
Mm.
Right. So how he is able to capture this dynamism is, as I have told you, one of the techniques that he has used is um, uh, by conceptually blending spaces, or for example, personifying the city. Then again, he has not used specific characters for every occasion, for every essay. In fact, for every moment, description of every moment includes, multiple characters, and the characters are never named in these essays. You'll find characters anonymous. They are simply referred as she, he, his, her, uh, like this. And for example, a road, or the Brooklyn Bridge, for example, is seen by various these minor characters who are just passing by, right? And they are reminiscing about the space. So there is this role of memory as well as transformation. They are recollecting, they are reconnecting themselves with that place, right? So that's how the dynamism is captured in his narrative. And interestingly, when I uh, listen to both of your presentations, I could connect somewhere to how Colson Whitehead is using space in the Underground Railroad, because I was also trying to connect the Underground Railroad with the way Whitehead is portraying the city in the Colossus of New York, and also another, his first novel that we have not discussed in any of our presentations, and that is Colson Whitehead's The Intuitionist, where he is using a very important motif of the elevators. Right, so the elevator, something which is in motion, the Underground Railroad, again something which is in motion, and the city, the New York City, which in itself is not in motion, but it is transforming, it is changing continuously. So for me, I was trying mentally, I was trying to connect the three work together with, the motive, and why Colson Whitehead must have been using these, key elements in throughout his work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. I think we had a very beautiful, really beautiful presentations, complementary presentations, and I really have to say I like the I think there was a multidisciplinary panel. So the creative, the humanity, the literary, and the social sciences approach, also with a cognitive approach. I find this, I found it very, very, not just interesting, but kind of inspiring about the dialogues that can go on, where each discipline really opens ways to think about our reading, what it means when we're reading a novel, what it means to be reading a poem, and how we can think and work on our own engagement, whether in the classroom, like Justin was mentioned several times, his students and the work that he does with his students, but also in the classroom when we present literature in a certain way, at a time in which everybody says that reading is in crisis. So really, thank you very much for inspiring me personally, but I think us. And I really wish you all the best. I hope to welcome you to U of L and to the conference in one of the next editions of the Louisville conference. All
Okay,
right.
Simona.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night,
you. Thanks a
Jaya.
lot.
Thank you so much for being with us so late.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you so much for this beautiful opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all your
you.
work. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah,
Take good
goodbye.
care. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.